John chapter 9, verses 1 to 12. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus. "But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming, when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After saying this, he spat on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. His neighbors and those who'd formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they asked. He replied, "The man they call Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash, so I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said.
So as Isabel read for us, John chapter 9 and verses 1 to 12. And in this passage, it is interesting how contemporary ideas mirror ancient ideas. One of the contemporary ideas that plagues Western society, that is actually a very Eastern idea and has crept into society in this part of the world, is the idea of karma, K-A-R-M-A, which comes from Hinduism and really has no part in a view of the world that is governed by Christianity. But it was something that had crept into Judaism at the time of Jesus and that has crept into the church today. So we hear in verse 2 that Jesus' disciples say, "Teacher, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Now, I'm very fond of a quote that came from the rock singer Bono, who was in a band called U2, for those who know about these things. And he said that he was very glad that the world was not governed by karma, but by grace. Because if the world was governed by karma, then he would be going to hell. But because the world is governed by Jesus and his grace, he hopes to go to heaven. And this should be our position. There are passages that in the Bible that indicate that the sins of the father will be visited on people to the third or fourth generation. But this is a very different idea, and perhaps one day we can have a sermon on that to clarify the differences. But Jesus here makes it clear, firstly, that it wasn't this man who had sinned and therefore was blind. And that's a very important notion, because if you think about it, the question is so illogical. This man was born blind. Within Judaism and within Christianity, we live under the idea that we live once and then face the judgment of God for the way that we have lived. If he was born blind, how could he have possibly have sinned? There is no notion of a past life or reincarnation to cover that. And Jesus makes it clear also that he was blind in order for some good thing to take place, not in order that some bad thing might be displayed. Because his life to this point had been lived in order that the work of God might be displayed in him. His life was coming to its highest point, not his lowest. And so this man was about to be healed. We don't know why it isn't the case that everybody isn't healed. I was once asked to preach at a conference for the deaf and hard of hearing Christian Fellowship. And I was a very popular speaker, so the second year I was invited to come back. But this year they gave me the subject of healing. And I think that was the death knell of my preaching career amongst the deaf and hard of hearing Christian Fellowship, because I couldn't tell them what they wanted to hear. I couldn't say that if they came forward, we would pray for them and their hearing would be miraculously restored. It doesn't work that way, and we know it doesn't work that way, but we don't know why it doesn't work that way. And then Jesus says something quite remarkable. He says, as long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. And the question we ask ourselves is, what is this night that Jesus is referring to? Well, on the basis, he says then in verse 5, while I am in the world, I am the light of the world, we could legitimately say that night is the time when Jesus leaves the world. And there's a certain degree of truth in that. But on another level, if you check out Matthew chapter 5, Jesus also says to his disciples that they are the light of the world. So, to some degree, the light remains in the world. And if you want a viewpoint on that, my article in the Church magazine talks a little bit about how us being the light of the world works. So there is that aspect to it, but then there are others. There are all kinds of night that occurs in our lives if we understand that this is a metaphor. Day is the time when we can work, night is the time when we cannot work. Bear in mind that this was a time when there were no electric light switches. First of all, you could say that night for some people is when old age hits and they suddenly find that they cannot do as much as they used to in living for God. For some people, the time when night comes is with serious illness and death. And with these things, as Jesus says, then no one can work. The greatest night that we know is coming is the time when Jesus will return and judgment will fall upon the whole earth and all its generations, and the dead will be raised. And at that point, there will be a cut-off, because if at that point you have not entered into a grace relationship with God, there will be no more opportunity to turn things around. And that idea of turning things around is absolutely central to Christianity. Our religious word, repentance, is a word about being sorry, but it is also a word about turning things around. One of the other things that I was writing about in my current article in the magazine is the way that religion makes rules for us. I was quoting the passage in the letters of the Apostle Paul where he says that people say to us, taste not and touch not. And that we shouldn't be concerned with those kind of religious instructions that have only to do with this world. You know, people get very uptight about things like halal meat sometimes. And the Bible makes it clear that idols are nothing. So meat that has been prepared under the blessing of an idol means nothing to us unless our conscience troubles us, in which case we should leave well alone. But there are all kinds of rules that our religion makes for us that has nothing to do with God. As churches, we are excellent and we are excelling at making rules when the Bible is silent. We don't like gaps in our understanding, so we make a rule. We shouldn't do this thing. Now, aren't you rather getting off your point here, Darren? Well, no, because in society we have lots of nice things that people are supposed to do, particularly if they're good, God-fearing Christians, and nasty things that you're not supposed to do if you're God-fearing Christians. If you'd have been around King Street a few days ago, you would have seen me walking down the road with a prostitute. And obviously I'm not meant to do that, am I? But motives can be misinterpreted. Here, the leveling that might be put about Jesus is a very small thing. It just says in verse 6, he spat on the ground. Ooh, how gross and unpleasant. And then even worse, with the saliva, he mixed it up with the dust of the ground and put it on the man's eyes. Which is very, very strange. And we don't know exactly why he did it. We do know, and this is my little pet theory for what it amounts to, but it may be entirely incorrect, that when God created man and woman at the very beginning, he made them from the dust of the earth. And here Jesus is making something from the dust of the earth. Whatever parts of the eye were not functioning, whatever was not right, perhaps he was putting it right. It's interesting, you could probably learn a lot from some of the ladies that you meet about this. It's several generations now where ladies have been applying mud packs to their face to make them look younger. I don't know whether that works or not. Perhaps you can tell me afterwards. But it's a similar sort of idea, only this is divinely guided, whereas putting a mud pack on your face is probably guided by Number 7 or some other cosmetic retailer. And then perhaps more important, or as important, Jesus sent him to wash. But he didn't just send him to wash, he sent him to wash in the pool of Siloam. Now, Siloam means sent. I don't mean S-C-E-N-T. I'm not still selling cosmetics. Sent as in S-E-N-T. And it was just as important that Jesus applied mud to his eyes as it was this man obeyed God's instruction and went to do what God wanted him to do. And he came home seeing. And so all of a sudden, he is restored, but not restored in the truest sense, because he never saw before. In a sense, it was almost like now he had a gift in his life that in the normal order of things he would only have received when he arrived in heaven. Something he'd never had before, the gift of sight. And it's strange how it works out, isn't it? Because by the time we get to verse 8, people are talking about this man and they say, well, he looks like the man who used to beg around here, but it can't be him because he can see, and the man we saw sitting and begging couldn't see. And so others said, we're told, no, he only looks like him. But he himself gave a faithful testimony and said, I am that man. And so he told them this fantastic story. I mean, fantastic in the sense of unbelievable. The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see. And so Jesus again attracts attention to himself. But once again, by the time they begin to look for him, he has gone and moved on. They ask, where is this man? And the man can only say, I don't know. Now we live in one of these times of night where our work for God can be restricted. You might be the sort of person who was used to going around helping people, and now you can't go around and help people. But you can sit at home and pray. But it is hard to sit at home and pray because you feel disconnected from society in a way that you didn't before. I was talking on the phone a few weeks ago to our friend Veronica, and who used to live at Park Court, for those who remember her. And she had a stroke, I guess, more than a year ago now. And one thing I always think of her is that she was somebody who was always busy within a sheltered housing community helping people. And now, partially because of her physical situation and partially because of the situation in the world, she can't do that anymore. There are things that some of us can do. The problem is that for some of us, there are too many things that we can do. Oh, to be a nurse in times like this, where the work is piled up to the sky, and you take away a little of the pile and double comes in its place. Reminds me of when in verse 4 Jesus says, night is coming. I read something on the internet. You can read almost anything on the internet. But I read something on the internet that asked whether the coronavirus or COVID or whatever we are calling it this week is predicted in the Bible. I'm not that smart, really. I'll leave that to these self-styled prophets who are saying that it definitely is. But what is definitely predicted in the Bible is that mankind suffers because of their rebellion against God. And if mankind suffers, it is not only the non-Christians who suffer, it is all of humankind. The situation becomes harder. And it is interesting that Jesus doesn't say, as long as it is day, I must do the works of him who sent me. He says to his disciples, and hear this very carefully, as long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. It is our job to work empowered by Jesus, alongside Jesus as very much junior partners, to bring grace and life into lives, just as much as the encroaching nighttime will allow us. And just as these people who were neighbors of the man who was born blind said, who is this man and where is he? Our principal job amongst all of our other jobs is to point people to Jesus. Let's hope that we can still do that work while there is time. Amen.